Thursday, February 2. Term limits and borrowing points. Read Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 1 to 5. What did the Lord require of his people as revealed in these verses? Deuteronomy 15, beginning at verse 1, At the end of every 7 years you shall grant a release of debts, and this is the form of the release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbour shall release it. He shall not require it of his neighbour or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Of a foreigner you may require it, but you shall give up your claim to what is owed by your brother, except when there may be no poor among you. For the Lord will greatly bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance. Only if you carefully obey the voice of the Lord your God and observe with care all these commandments which I command you today. In harmony with other 7-year statutes of Exodus 21:2 and Leviticus 25:3 and 4, not only were the slaves or servants and the land regulated, but also the lenders. Exodus 21 verse 2 reads, If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. And Leviticus 25 verses 3 and 4. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. Because the lenders did not want to forgive any debts, the longest anyone could be in debt was 7 years. Whatever else we can take from these verses, they do show that the Lord cares about these kinds of financial issues, especially when at that time they concerned fellow Israelites. These verses also show that the Lord acknowledged the reality of debt, no matter how bad it generally was. He also emphasized that it was to be avoided as much as possible. Today, by contrast, people in many parts of the world have loans for 30 or 40 years for home purchases. It seems that one reason houses cost so much is that credit is available to provide loans to purchase them. Meanwhile, many people, parents and students, wonder about borrowing money for an education. As a rule, getting a college degree will enhance a person's income capability for the rest of his or her life. Some people might have to borrow some money to pay for their education, but keep in mind these factors. You have to pay it back with interest. Try to get all of the grants and scholarships that you can qualify for. Work and save all you can for school. Take only courses that will lead to a job. Have parents help. In Bible times, parents gave their children farmland so that they could make a living. Today, that inheritance should likely be an education so that they can become independent adults. In an ideal world, there would be no borrowing and no debt. But because we don't live in an ideal world, there might be times when it is necessary to borrow. Just make sure that you have the best deal possible and the best interest rate available. Then borrow the very minimum that you need and pay it off as quickly as possible to save on interest costs. In principle, however, to whatever degree humanly possible, we should seek to avoid debt, and by following biblical financial principles in our everyday lives, we can go a long way toward avoiding unnecessary debt and the terrible strain it can put on us and our families. And so to finish today, if you have lent people money, how honest and fair and kind are you in your dealings with them? How would you fare before God when you have to answer for those dealings, as we read in Ecclesiastes 12, verse 14? For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind, sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia This podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. And you can listen and watch at the same time on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful. And here is a disclaimer. Contents of these lessons are not intended to be financial advice, but is general commentary based on biblical principles. The reader is encouraged to seek competent professional advice which will suit their particular personal situation.